It's brilliant. And like I hate the whole notion of like, oh, just do what makes you happy. Like I'm telling you, I'm tired of hearing motivational cliches of be happy, live your. I'm so sick of it. Um, because it's just fucking boring. But number two, it's not necessarily about being happy and living a dream, and that it's a bad thing. But more so to the point that when you talk about happiness and living a dream, you're talking about such a small faction of life that
Because there would come a time when what people wanted wasn't more ease, but more challenge and more difficulty. And that's really smart, and it's witty and it's true. And one of the things that I've come to understand, I believe, is that, and Dostoevsky knew this too. He wrote about this in.
So can we just take a second to appreciate the kind of gentleness Jordan Peterson has when he's in his element? Like he talks in this sort of soft father figure tone, as if he's not trying to teach you anything, but more so he's observing the world alongside you, and that's kind of what I get. But I want to speak more to the point he was just making about what people actually want isn't ease but challenge. And one of the things about kind of creating a better life for yourself, and that follows this vein of the Better Happens Daily philosophy, is that better isn't always about the easiest route to take. Oftentimes it's about doing that which makes your life better, but that doesn't always mean easier.
He said, if you set up a utopia so that all people had to do was eat cakes and busy themselves with the continuation of the species, that, yeah, right, Russian humor, that after a surfeit of that, after enough of that, which would happen quite quickly, people would just go mad just to break things, just so something unexpected and remarkable could happen, and that we're not.
So I want you to think back to like a day in which you had like a day off or a week off. Like, how quickly did you get bored? Like, think about that. Like, the reason I say that is because, like, there are times in our lives in which, we need a day off and we can actually enjoy it because it's like our body feels like we earned it. But, like, for the most part, if you have nothing planned for the day or you don't try and do anything, like, you feel lethargic, you feel useless, you feel gross. And the reason for that is because humans have the desire to be productive. They have a desire to do things and accomplish things. And so when you look at, how our society is structured today and kind of the values that we have as a society, we value happiness. And so if you look at the title of this particular video, of this clip, the title is Why You Should Stop Aiming for Happiness. We value happiness with good intentions, but the problem with happiness is it's like a utopia. It can't be sustained unless it's through force. And when you force happiness, it becomes like, what's the word for it? It becomes produced and not like experienced. And so it's like keeping someone alive for the sake of keeping them alive with no regard to their quality of life. And that's what happens when you try and force happiness. So what he's essentially describing is if you put people in a state of absolute perfection in a society, you'll essentially just become miserable because you can expect the same thing every day, and that gets boring and that gets maddening real quick.
That's a good thing to know, because you don't want to suffer unduly. That seems reasonable. And you might think, because of that really what you want is happiness. But then Solzhenitsyn, for example, he wrote about what happened in the Gulag Archipelago under Stalin and said, if your goal is happiness, what are you going to do when the jackboots hammer down your door at 2 a.m. and haul you off to the prison camp, because you're not going to be happy there. And so, happiness is a boat that's easily capsized and the waves are always there. And so if your philosophy is one of, say, impulsive happiness, same sort of thing Dostoevsky was pointing at, and Kierkegaard, then you're not prepared when all hell breaks loose. And all hell, it will absolutely 100% break through at some point in your life. And you're lucky if it won't be decades. It'll certainly be some of it, and it might be a lot of it. And for some of you, it's going to be damn near the whole thing. And so if what floats your boat is happiness, you're going to be capsized by the first decent wave. And so then you might ask yourself, what do you have instead of happiness that might be even more reliable? And I do think that adventure is more reliable than happiness. And
so let's dissect that for a second. What is it about adventure that appeals to the soul more than happiness? Well, the thing about adventure is, one, yeah, you have an end goal in mind, and the end goal should not be happiness. Please don't let it be happiness. And it's not that happiness isn't important, it's that it's not a priority. And the reason I say that is because happiness works a lot like a dog's tail. If a dog spends all of its time chasing its tail, it's just gonna be frustrated running around in circles. But if the dog just lives its life, the tail will follow. And so when you just live your life, happiness will follow. Albeit, that doesn't necessarily mean because it's following you, you're always going to be happy. It just means that when the conditions are right, and your state of mind is right, you will experience happiness. The same way sadness and anger, just because they follow you doesn't mean that they're taking you over.
one of the questions we always ask ourselves, this is the theodicy question, technically, you see the suffering in the world, you see the suffering of children, you see maybe your own children or your suffering, and you wonder, well, how can reality be constituted so that I can have faith in its essence when there is so much suffering? And one answer to that is something like, well, how much suffering do you want? And you might think, none. It's like, yeah, I don't think so. I don't think that's right. You want, at least you want something approximating optimized challenge. So you could say, at least you want to be pushed to your limit. And maybe you find the most exciting times in your life. In fact, you'll pay for this. You'll pay to have this experience. To be pushed to your limit. Not beyond it, or maybe even a bit beyond it, you know. And maybe not so far beyond it that you crumble and break and things fall apart. But, you know, could you...
Like, your life experience is probably going to be a lot harder than you expect. And your life experience is probably going to be a lot harder than other people. And I say that kind of bluntly because, like, your sense of suffering is going to manifest in a way in which you don't want it to. Right? Because what you might think you're going to suffer through isn't what you are actually going to suffer through. But let's take that kind of abstract concept and, like, you know, narrow it down. The reason he says that, you know, people don't want zero suffering is because if you don't have any suffering, you're going to get really bored of life. And then that's how you're going to suffer. Or on the other end of the spectrum, if you don't get bored, you kind of go mad because you want to do something. Sometimes you just want to, like, create chaos just so something happens. Like you go mad, and that's why you need to have challenge.
You know, and there's good evidence from the neuroscience literature that consciousness itself is something akin to dancing on the edge. So technically, when you're conscious, when you're awake, your brain is occupying a position between something. It's a position that's something like between chaos and order. And if your brain's maximally ordered, well, you're just bored, nothing is changing. And if you're chaotic, then it's anxiety and catastrophe. But you want to be positioned right between those two, and that's when your consciousness is optimized, you know. And when your consciousness is optimized, then you're deeply engaged in life, and everything seems alive and meaningful. And maybe that's the solution in some profound sense to the problem of suffering. It's that you optimize your interaction with chaos rather than being protected all the time from everything that could hurt you. And you kind of know this too if you have kids, because...
Notice how he's not using the word happy. He's using the word meaningful. And I think the reason for that is, I mean, don't confuse happiness and meaning. Happiness is kind of a state, right? It's a feeling. You feel happiness, you feel joy. But like meaning is like fulfilling. It's a deeper spiritual kind of experience.
You don't want to keep your kids in an infantile state, and because when they're infants, pretty much what you do with them, say they're 6 months and younger, is you just keep them secure and safe, right? You just provide everything that you can for them. You have to do that because, well, what are they going to do? They just lay there fundamentally and squawk now and then. I mean, it's not like they're ambulatory. They can't go out and do things for themselves, and so it's up to you, and your goal is to keep them secure and safe. But once they start being able to move around, then increasingly it's sort of up to them. And if you have any sense as a parent, the psychoanalysts used to say, the good mother necessarily fails. And what did they mean by that? They meant, well, if you're committed to your infant when you're a mother, for the first 6 months, it's like it's all the kid, 100%, full self-sacrifice devoted towards the infant. That's the right attitude. But even by 9 months, child can crawl around quite a lot. They're developing something of an independent will. You start handing them challenges. You start handing them responsibility, and you keep them on the edge. And some of your kids are going to be able to be pushed harder than others, and part of the reason you have to develop a relationship with your kids, and your husband for that matter, is so that, you can keep them dancing on the edge, on the proper edge. And that's even better than the mere provision of security.
So that point he was making about having kids is essentially that, if you want to raise a kid that's going to grow up to be competent out in society, you essentially want to hand that child, struggle and responsibility and challenge. And so essentially what he's saying about like the good mother is the good mother, allows their kid, at least this is how I interpret it. I could get it completely wrong, so let me know if I do. But essentially what he's saying is, a good mom allows their kid to mess up, to do things that are, wrong or bad, but not necessarily like get away with it, but to like, let them explore what their boundaries are. Let them explore kind of what is right and wrong, and kind of teach them as they go. Like, you can't give a child a philosophy book and expect them to understand how things operate in society. They have to actually engage with societal outlets and then realize, oh fuck, that wasn't right, so I'm not going to do that again, right? I scream in Target, I'm going to get punished, and I'm not going to get that candy I want, okay? I won't scream. And even if you don't scream, sometimes you just won't get a candy anyways, because that candy is bad for you, right? So it's being able to not just give kids challenges, like, give them a, puzzle or whatever to solve, but it's like putting them in conditions that challenge their preconceived notion of what is normal, seeing how they respond and react, and then course correcting as you do it. And so, it's just brilliant, because essentially what he's saying is that, like, if you want a fulfilling life, stop aiming for happiness and aim for doing things that challenge you in a way that pushes your limits so that you experience meaning, but not so much that you just feel hopeless entirely. It's brilliant. And like, I hate the whole notion of like, just do what makes you happy. Like, I'm telling you, I'm tired of hearing motivational cliches of be happy, live your. I'm so sick of it. Because it's just fucking boring. But number two, it's not necessarily about being happy and living a dream, and that it's a bad thing. But more so to the point that, when you talk about happiness and living a dream, you're talking about such a small faction of life that you essentially doom whoever you give that message to failure, to disappointment, and to suffering that wasn't warranted because you had well-intentioned naiveness. And so, one of the things that I try and do with speaking is I don't tell people to like, do what makes you happy. I hate that. But what I try and do is at least tell them to make choices that increase the conditions of your life so that you live a better life than you could have before. Which doesn't necessarily mean easier. It means better. Now, if you like what you saw today, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, leave a comment down below so that you can learn all the ways to develop a philosophy for a better life. When you subscribe to Better Happens Daily, you are saying to yourself, life can only get better from here. Remember, don't strive for happiness, strive for meaning. Optimize the struggle you experience. and finally push your limit. And not so that you can just become a competent individual, but so that you can experience the vibrancy that life has to offer. Now get out there and make better happen daily.